Chapter 6. Nazi Labor Front. We assembled one morning to hear a talk on the Nazi labor camps at an Anglo-German discussion group in the summer of 1935. Among the 3 or 4 brown shirts who came to meet us that morning, there was one, a certain Herr Müller. We found his talk interesting, and more than most speakers, he made us understand how readily youth could be led by that type of man and his appeal, for the man himself was intensely sincere. Much that he said was sound, and showed an experiment which could obviously be used for good ends, or exploited for very bad ends. But a little about him first. He was a middle-aged working man, lean and hardened by toil, and, we felt, by suffering. He was a skilled artisan, and having spent 4 years in the trenches in France and Flanders, had then faced years of unemployment. It was obvious that during that time he had kept his self-respect and done a great deal of reading, but, as he said to me at lunch afterwards, my own unemployment I could learn to bear, for the war in France had killed something in me, and I did not feel I could recover any great interest in life afterwards. But for my sons, it was different. The eldest one never had any work from the time he left school, and he has become so useless that I doubt if even the Führer can make any good out of him. The other 2, thank God, were only coming out of school when Hitler came into power, and they will be saved by the party. If an English working man had spent 4 years in France, and then saw that his 3 sons might all rot away, would he not be grateful if someone started a movement that would give them work, and the right attitude to work which I explained to you this morning? I should make it plain, he continued, that none of us claims that these labor camps and this view of work gives us any solution for the terrible problem of unemployment except on the most temporary basis. But we do claim that the attitude to work I have tried to express, together with the experiment of the work camp and labor camp, is a means of creating a background for further endeavor. We, that is Germany and the rest of Europe, must find a way out of this hideous problem if we are to survive. But we could not set our minds to work on this bigger problem unless, at least in some temporary form, we had met the dire need of 7 million men rotting in the streets of this country. Many false claims are made for this experiment of ours both at home and abroad. I would ask you to see in it no more than an experiment. You may not think it is a suitable method to use in your own countries, even temporarily. That is for you to decide. But I would ask you not to sneer at an honest attempt to meet a terrible situation, and I might add that, apart from anything else, I am profoundly grateful to the Führer for this idea, which has saved my own sons from the destruction of unemployment. Long-term unemployment was striking down the manhood of this nation like a plague. These sick men, many of them young, are regaining health of body and mind. That is Germany's temporary plan. Will Herr Müller tell us, asked a Frenchman, whether it is not true that these labor camps are really military camps in disguise, and whether all these men could not therefore easily be turned into soldiers, so that in fact Germany is building a vast subsidiary army under another name? Of course, I agree with you that if you have a large force of men who are undergoing this training, they could be used any time as soldiers. But I do not consider you have a right to call this a threat to peace. It would be, on the other hand, a threat to peace to have 7 million unemployed. I assure you, the men in the labor camps want no war. Most of them, victims of the last war, were unemployed. But surely you cannot accuse any country that has found ways and means of turning out healthy, strong, and disciplined young men of threatening war. Everything in a nation can be exploited for war purposes, but that is no argument against keeping your manhood from rotting. We argued this point for some time, and it was obvious that as a temporary measure for dealing with thousands of unemployed, it was good, and that there was much to be said for such an experiment in peacetime. But, as we pointed out, in a world of high political tension, and in view of the aggressiveness of much Nazi teaching, the Führer could scarcely expect the rest of the world, especially Germany's neighbors, to be happy at the building of what Herr Müller himself recognized could so easily become a powerful war organization. We are not convinced of the peaceful intentions of the Führer, and therefore we view all these things with mistrust, said a British economist. Then we cannot argue further, said Herr Müller, because the members of the Labor Front are convinced the Führer wants peace. I felt as I had done before, that while there may be some in the high councils of the Nazis who both want war and believe it will come, you could not mistrust the sincerity of men like Herr Müller, who are utterly convinced that Hitler wishes to avoid war. They most certainly are not deliberately devoting their energies to a war program. In order to strengthen our argument, we turned to another point and asked, what sort of education do you give youth assembled in their labor camps, and what do you discuss? Herr Müller turned to one of the other SA men present. Here was a very different and distasteful type. Not a working man, probably a small shopkeeper, obviously second-rate, who poured forth all the cheap and shoddy propaganda on race teaching, etc. We could get nowhere with him, because to every question we asked, there came a kind of gramophone record reply. But it was obvious that the camps gave opportunity for concentrated propaganda of Nazi doctrine. We visited a camp that afternoon, and sat talking late that evening among ourselves. Here was an experiment that was a question of internal politics. We felt that it was really not our business to criticize, and what is more, we were convinced that the vast majority of the members of this corps were sincere, not only in their desire for peace, but in their belief that this was a peaceful organization. And yet, it was clear that it could very easily become a powerful war organization. And further, it was a skillful war of getting men together and subjecting them to intensive education along Nazi lines. We were puzzled and unhappy, and yet realized that the enthusiastic response from youth which Herr Müller evoked could scarcely be wondered at, and indeed was a sign of good rather than bad in the youth who responded.